Parks did not stay in her seat because she was tired. She refused to move to the back of the bus for the express purpose of launching the Montgomery bus boycott. There's a version of the story that claims she was just tired after a long day at work. A few decades back, that was the official story taught in schools. She was tired, even though Rosa Parks had insisted early on that she was not physically tired so much as tired of giving in. The story I learned in school is that she was tired. Here's why this is important. It's a question of why she did it. Why did she refuse to surrender her seat on December 1st, 1955 to a white passenger? Was it because her back was hurting after a long day's work, or was it because Rosa Parks was part of a movement to make change in our country and in our culture? If an entire generation is taught that she was just tired, they can continue to believe that a single, courageous person acting independently can make a difference. And they never learn the deep need to be connected to a strategic community holding a vision of a beloved community. Rosa Parks had been to the Highlander Folk School for activism training in the summer of '55. Emmett Till's murder had enervated the people that same summer. She had attended a civil rights mass meeting the weekend before refusing to surrender her seat on the bus. Parks had been the secretary of the NAACP for 12 years prior to that famous incident. It is not that her feet or her back were tired that caused her to act. It was for the movement. It was for all her people in Montgomery, and in the end it was for the whole nation. It was not for herself. Liberation is not a personal journey. It is for the whole community. This is not to say that personal liberation doesn't exist or is not of value. Instead, what I'm lifting up is how we sometimes get lost thinking about personal liberation when the greater goal is liberation for the whole. My personal liberation is where it begins for me, and it's how it spreads from individual to individual, but the full story is about the whole community. It would be as if we told the Exodus story as a tale of one man's heroic attempt to find personal liberation by fleeing across the Red Sea from Pharaoh's army. But the liberation story in Exodus is not about Moses' personal journey. It's about the Jewish people making that journey. Moses certainly found personal liberation through his actions. I mean, at the beginning of that journey, Moses has a lot of problems to work through. And one part of the Exodus story is the liberation of Moses to become a great leader so that the people can find liberation. But we don't ever cast that story as only about Moses finding his freedom. A person standing on the corner of a street one day, laughing like a man out of his mind. "What are you laughing at?" a passerby asks. "Do you see that stone in the middle of the street? Since I got here this morning, 10 people have stumbled over it and cursed it, but not one has taken the trouble to remove it so others wouldn't stumble." Personal liberation is about me never tripping over that stone in the middle of my path again. One step toward full liberation is to remove that stone so that I and others are no longer in danger of tripping over it. A greater step is to look at why the stone was there in the first place, who put it there, why, and how we can build a world so that nobody wants to put stones in other people's paths again. Now, sure as you're born, there are stones that are in our paths because that's the nature of stones and the nature of paths. And there are stones that are in our paths because people have put them there to maintain a status quo to their benefit. And here I'm not talking about stones as a metaphor simply as hurdles and difficulties that we all have to deal with because that's life. I mean oppression and systemic targeted injustices that occur. My colleague Susan Frederick Gray, echoing the sentiment of Gandhi and King and Mother Teresa, says, "True freedom is knowing that we cannot be free while others are oppressed." We shall keep at it until all shall be free. Not just some people, not just my people, but all people. That is the point that marks us as religious people, as Unitarian Universalists, as people of conscience, as civilized in our contemporary context. Lilla Watson, a Gangulu Australian artist and activist, frames this point with graceful clarity. She says, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." It's not enough to secure your own freedom and liberation. It is not even enough to secure the liberation of people like yourself who share your identity, feel the same oppression that you feel. Systemic oppression, and thus systemic liberation, is the whole deal. And more importantly, the deep work of being an ally is not in helping others. It is in partnering with others for mutual progress. This brings up the difficult aspect of what to do with them in the us versus them mentality created by oppression. The answer is, of course, to erase the distinctions, to be an ally from either direction of that oppression equation. Nelson Mandela, in his book Long Walk to Freedom, wrote, "It was during those long, lonely years that my hunger for freedom of my own people became a hunger for the freedom of all people. The oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. To be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. That is the true test of our devotion to freedom." For Rosa Parks, the question of the bus driver's liberation was not at the top of her list. It was not in her attention, but that is part of the point of liberation in the longer arc of history. Moses was not concerned about the Egyptians and how they were going to get liberated from their oppressive ways. Yet, in the long run, that is a key piece to the full accomplishment of liberation and freedom. The top story yesterday in the Cornell Daily Sun was about white supremacists on campus. So serving the Cornell University in the Ithaca, New York area, the newspaper was founded in 1880 and is the oldest continuously independent college daily in the United States. And the feature article from yesterday is about an anonymous group of white students who plan to issue demands and host a march for white equality. They consider themselves a civil rights group. In an open letter to the public, the anonymous group states that they are, quote, "a community of white students who wish to preserve and advance their race." Their demands are essentially to counter the demands of the Black Student United group. They want to not change the name of the Cornell plantation. They want to not have more diversity course requirements. They want to not have more people of color hired as therapists for the student body. And they would like the Black Students United group to be disbanded. So in other words, these white students just want these black students to stop. The last line in the article is a quote from one of the anonymous white students. "White people are fed up with being treated like a minority." Just let that quote sink in for a minute. White people are fed up with being treated like a minority. Now, it's possible that the white student group is a Facebook hoax to rile up liberal schools. Similar hoaxes have been perpetrated at other major colleges over this past year. Trolls is the term used on the internet for people who go fishing for trouble like this. But even if this is not actual students raising what they think of as legitimate concerns, there's enough of a ring of truth and plausibility to make people fall for the hoax. These anonymous white students, or more likely these racist internet trolls, are much like the vocal white people at recent political rallies. They cast themselves as the new victims. They present a story in which white people are the new oppressed people. The anger and the hurt behind their words are true. But that ending quote, whether it's from trolls or from white students, reveals how baseless the whole argument is. They want to be treated as equals because being treated as a minority is bad. But they seem to confuse their equality with their privilege. And all of this looks to me like a rubber band snapping back. Part of change dynamics theory is the principle of the rubber band. Lynn Garman used to talk with me about this. She would say that any progress against the status quo will always have the rubber band effect. The rubber band can stretch, but the tendency is for everything to snap back to the way that it was. And while I contend that every stretch does actually loosen that rubber band, her point is to watch for the snapback reaction in a system. There are two major recurring news stories over this past year that are related to race. Of course, there's the big picture of 8 years of an African-American president of the United States. But more recently, we have two major trends. One, the Black Lives Matter protests in response to the killing of unarmed black men by police, which has highlighted the continuous existence of racism and the necessity for anti-racist activism. And two, the current political antics of some presidential candidates, which demonstrate that racist, bigoted, and xenophobic words and deeds are acceptable to share in open and public situations. Now hear me, I'm not saying that these bigoted ideas are suddenly appearing, only that the people at the political rallies are suddenly feeling authorized to speak and behave in these bigoted and violent ways publicly. This is the snapback of any progress our country has made on the issue of racism and prejudice in recent years. So it is important to not be discouraged by the news, and it is a reminder to me that liberation is not simply about being free from oppression or injustice. Liberation is also being free for something. It is about being free for that bigger vision, and it is important to continue to see that bigger vision. Viktor Frankl, in his phenomenal book, Man's Search for Meaning, writes, "Freedom is only part of the story and half of the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole phenomenon, whose positive aspect is responsibility. In fact, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibility." So freedom and responsibility belong to each other. We frame that in our keystone principle, with that concept calling for the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Free speech is tempered by the responsibility not to speak violence. Freedom without responsibility is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness. My freedom can never be contingent on taking freedom away from another. A prophetic glance at the cultural landscape reveals an alarming re-entrenchment of old racist and oppressive behaviors and ideas. And it's not just racism, it's misogyny, homophobia, ableism, and xenophobia that is also growing. And we shall not sit idle as these stones are heaped into our paths. In our reading this morning, the question is posed, who are the prophets who inspired you? The reading mentions Isaiah, Tubman, Gandhi, and Seattle as inspirational prophets who cast a vision of the way of justice lived according to the way of peace, the beloved community. Who are the prophets that inspire you? Rosa Parks inspires me to act for justice, but also to act while connected to a strategic community holding a vision of the beloved community. Nelson Mandela inspires me to refuse the division between oppressors and oppressed. Know the difference, but don't let it dictate your whole vision. The beloved community is a vision for all people, and it will not be realized until all shall be free. We will need to find a way to even liberate the mean people, the bigots, and the fools itching to commit violence. The beloved community is a long vision. I do not believe that we will see it in our lifetimes, but it is still our work to bring the human venture one step closer, to stretch the rubber band again, to remove the stones yet again from our paths, to proclaim boldly that bigotry and violence will not be ignored, to bend the moral arc of the universe that little bit more toward justice until all shall be free. In a world without end, may it be so. Let us join in singing our closing hymn, number 151, I Wish I Knew How.